The first knock sounded like a memory. Evelyn woke to the sound of rain at the window and a hush in the apartment that felt like a held breath. She was alone. The city outside was a soft, distant pulse. At midnight, a knocking came at her door. 3 short, pause, 2 quick. It was precise, as if measured by bones. Evelyn stayed still, listening, fingers curled around her cooling tea. She opened the door. The hallway was empty, lit by the dull emergency lamps. On the floor, beneath the mailboxes, a scrap of paper waited. She picked it up with a thumb that trembled. "I can hear you," it read in pencil. Beneath, someone had written, "Listen." Evelyn told herself it was a prank. She told herself many practical things. Yet the knocks continued in developed patterns. They learned the rhythms of her building, found the seams between walls, and began to imitate noises she recognized. The way her father used to knock 3 slow, then 1 fast. The cadence of a lullaby she hummed as a child. The imitation bled into her days. She cataloged sounds, taped a recorder to the table, and played the nights back like an archaeologist. In a slowed track, she heard a whisper under the wood. "Open." As weeks passed, the knocks migrated into the day. A neighbor reported similar noises. Lauren, who lived across the hall, sat in her apartment in a stupor and told Evelyn, "It says names." Neighbors spoke of dreams populated with knocks. The building's small sounds became a chorus of old things wanting attention. Evelyn sought help from Mara, a therapist, who asked a question that shifted the problem. "What do you want the knocking to be?" Evelyn answered honestly, "I want it to stop." Mara suggested boundaries and routines. Evelyn tried them, and the boundaries failed where the knocks were patient enough to wait them out. She learned that sound has geometry, where it collected, how it refracted, which wall was a thin seam. She traced the knocks like braille and found a pattern, taps that corresponded to letters. One night she decoded them. In the slow, insistent sequence, the message spelled, over and over, "Come home." The words hit something inside her that she had boxed away. She had left a small town years before. A yellow door house, a mother with ink-stained fingers, and she had told herself she had left for freedom. The building's cadence wrenched memory loose. When the message shifted to "Bring her," the letter seemed to swing open a closet she had locked and forgotten. Objects appeared in impossible places. A child's shoe on her windowsill, a folded paper crane under the radiator, a ticket stub from a cinema she hadn't visited in years. Lauren's condition deteriorated. Pages found in her wardrobe read, "Come home." The city's life continued, indifferent, and the apartment felt like a skin that encompassed not only Evelyn, but a ledger of absent things. Eventually, a letter arrived with a single, formal line typed on old paper. "We have kept your spaces neat." Below, in ink, "It is time to return." The instruction made no sense until Evelyn decoded a municipal file that named an unclaimed patient, Amelia Hart, born 1979, records incomplete. That brittle stack of paper smelled of disinfectant and closed wards. The house asked for restitution, and the knocks led Evelyn like a summons. Following the trail, Evelyn found a foster home and a box of unclaimed items: a small comb, a child's photograph, a hand-stitched doll. The items felt heavy with the gravity of other lives. The building's knocks quieted when she brought the things home and spoke their names aloud. She worked like a clerk reconciling ledgers, filling forms, calling offices, tracking addresses. Each small victory softened the cadence that tapped at her walls. Weeks became a litany. Evelyn moved through her days with a focused mania that alarmed friends. She kept lists, names, addresses, dates, the positions of doors in houses she'd lived in. Her apartment filled with notes, index cards like small white flags. She taped them along the narrow hallway, a map of memory that glowed in lamplight. Friends asked if she was sleeping. She could not explain what it would mean to sleep and not be listening. Her nights deepened, layered with a sense that the building was sorting and balancing accounts, not only for her, but for everyone who had passed through its doors. She sat in the dark with the recorder and learned to slow sound in ways that revealed edges. The micro rhythm of a tap that indicated a child's heartbeat. The metallic rasp that prefaced certain consonants. Exhaustion sharpened perception until she could pick out voices beneath the radiator's music. There were other strange correspondences, names in the municipal files tied to addresses in other towns. A woman in an old census list turned out to be a neighbor's grandmother. The building had preserved a trail, like breadcrumbs, and Evelyn followed stubbornly. Each trace contained small human evidence: a library card with a few stamps, a folded hospital form with a handwritten note, a release slip that someone had failed to collect. One afternoon, a municipal officer named Claire replied to Evelyn's queries with a realism that felt like permission. "These things fall through cracks," Claire said, riffling brittle pages. "Sometimes the cracks are institutional. Sometimes they're human." Together, they pieced through a ledger of unclaimed lives and found a name that kept appearing: Amelia Hart, linked to an address, an intake form, a not quite final notice. As Evelyn chased the paperwork, the knocking's meaning deepened. It was not merely an annoyance insisting on attention. It was an accounting system trying to be reconciled by someone who would heed it. The more she acted, more forms filled, more addresses chased. The softer the taps became, as if a wound were being bandaged. At night, the taps spelled out rituals. 3 knocks, pause. 2 knocks, then a long stretch of hush. When Evelyn read the pattern aloud in the corridor, speaking the taps like words, she felt something shift in the plaster. A small warmth where before had been only cold. She started to say names into the air with ritual cadence, setting the child's name into the world like laying a table. On a gray afternoon, Lauren returned from a temporary stay at a care facility. She stood in her doorway with a small notebook, eyes washed with new recognition. "It came to me," she said simply. "A name. I wrote it down." The contagion of attention spread. Neighbors offered boxes. A regrade clerk offered long afternoons of sorting lists. A social worker took forms with a look that meant, at last, someone was paying attention. Even with this small civic tenderness, the house still had its hunger. At the bottom of a narrow stair that had seemed to shift in shape the first time Evelyn descended it, she found a small, bundled object on a bed. The room smelled of old soap and wet cloth. She unwound the cloth and found a doll, hand-stitched, its paint flaked. Inside was a child's note. "I am cold. Come." The blunt simplicity of that plea cut through everything. A fact, not an accusation. Evelyn washed the little garments, mended the stitches, lit a candle, and set a chair before the lamp. The building's taps softened into a conversational rhythm. Sometimes they paused to allow a reply. It felt as if the walls themselves listened when Evelyn sat at her table and said names aloud. Amelia Hart, Claudine, Robert Hargreaves. Each time she spoke, the taps returned with a gentler cadence. The house responded like a ledger being balanced. Months passed. Boxes were acknowledged. A file marked incomplete was reopened. A burial place marked and tended. Lauren received a place with overnight care. Neighbors came with cups of tea and gentle check-ins. A social worker called to report that a distant relative had recognized a photograph and that some small restoration of record and dignity was underway. The knocks no longer demanded. They murmured. Yet, some nights, the building delivered a different tone, a low undercurrent beneath the polite taps that was not a human voice. On those nights, Evelyn sat in the dark and thought of the many small neglected things that make a life. A missing shoelace, a photograph, a folded shirt, and how the house had collected them like pebbles in a belly. She had become what the city needed. Someone to match names to things, and things to names. The ledger closed slowly. One rain-heavy dawn, the taps arranged themselves into a final pattern and paused. Evelyn opened her door and found the corridor clear. Near the mailboxes, a child's shoe lay, placed neatly and slightly muddied, as if walked back from somewhere. A neighbor asked if she felt lighter. Evelyn pressed the photograph of the child to her chest and allowed herself a small smile. "A little," she said. "It feels like settling." She kept the doll on her table by the lamp, and sometimes, in the hush between rain and sleep, she would hear 3 short knocks, pause, too quick, and she would smile in the dark, lift the photograph to her chest and whisper back, "You're home." Like, comment, subscribe, and rest well. You've been listening to Lilith Sanctum. Until next time.